are going to be recording today's session so that it will be available following on our YouTube channel. And this month is Suicide Prevention and Recovery Month. The theme for the month is Hope, Resilience, and Recovery. Earlier in the month, the town of Truckee made a proclamation supporting Suicide Prevention and Recovery Month, and we've had a lot of fantastic activities. Suicide prevention is not just confined to one day or 1 week or 1 month, it's year round, and we welcome you to stay involved with us year round. We have social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube that you can follow. We also have a monthly newsletter that you can register for, and you can reach out to me, Shannon Decker, sdecker@sierracommunityhouse.org anytime to learn more. Mental Health in the Mountains started in 2016 as a partnership with the Suicide Prevention Coalition and UC Davis. We have also, as a coalition, been working on a book study, Trauma Stewardship. In 2019, there was book study in yoga. And then in early 2020, as COVID was setting in, we had a conversation with one of the authors. And one of the questions that kept coming up on that conversation was, what do we do when we're experiencing trauma? What can we actually do to work with our nervous system? And so in the back of my head, I thought, Laurie Strand has a lot of incredible skills that she could teach us. And so that's what brought us to reviving Mental Health in the Mountains. If you joined us last week, Dr. Sally Spencer-Thomas did an incredible job of talking through a lot of the surviving and thriving through crisis and what we can do with workplace settings. Today is the resiliency training model, and next Tuesday you can join us for Live Through This. It's a presentation from Desiree Stage on art, social justice, and suicide attempt survivors' lived experience. We have a couple more trainings that are coming up this month. We have a Know the Signs training. It's a very brief gatekeeper training on the 23rd. QPR is another gatekeeper training. It's online, on demand, anytime. So you're welcome to sign up for that. And we also have one more mental health first aid, a virtual mental health first aid this coming Saturday. So you can register for those at the TahoeLifeline.org/training. Some of our logistics and etiquette. This is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel. You do not have any video or audio. The only video and audio that you'll see is myself and Laurie. This is the webinar platform, not the Zoom meeting platform. You do have the ability to chat, and so there is a chat feature that you can find. You would be able to chat with the whole group, as Caroline has done. Hello, Caroline. You are welcome. Laurie did provide some incredible resources that I was able to email out to you. So if you haven't checked your email within the past hour, go ahead and check it there. You can also privately chat with folks, and there is a Q&A. So on the Q&A, you can type in a question, and then as Laurie is presenting, she and I will monitor those and get answers to your questions. There's also going to be a poll. And so the way the poll works, we're going to do a really quick practice, is I'm going to launch a question, and it's going to show up. There should be maybe a green bar. The question is, do you have the National Suicide Prevention Hotline and Crisis Text Line programmed into your phone? That phone number is 1-800-273-TALK or 8255. So go ahead and take a minute to complete this. And once I see that we've got about 50–60% have responded, let's wait to see if maybe 1 or 2 more people will respond. And then I will end the poll, and I'm going to share the results. Yes, of course I do, or no, not yet. Having that suicide prevention lifeline number in your phone is an incredible intervention. And so it is going to be right here on your screen. If you haven't had a chance, please go ahead and program that. You can also program the Sierra Community Houses helpline, 1-800-736-1060. The Suicide Prevention Lifeline, it's 24/7. It's free, it's anonymous. Crisis Text Line is the same. They're 2 separate entities. And it's not just for you. It might be for someone that you're concerned about. It might not be for now. It might come in handy down the road. So thank you so much for putting that intervention in your pocket. We will be asking for feedback at the conclusion of today's training, so look forward to that. And to answer the question that came in through Q&A with Caroline, we do have that. The recording is available on YouTube, and there's also a blog that I've set up with all the resources. So Sally has a whole bunch of different resources from her training last week, and Laurie sent out a bunch of resources. I compile all those and put them onto a blog spot. So you will receive an email later today after everything has been wrapped up with links to today's training and the resource page, which is where you'll also find Sally's presentation. So if you are interested in connecting with Laurie or learning more about Community Resiliency Model, there is her contact information. It's my pleasure to introduce her. Laurie obtained her master's degree in social work from the University of Montana and is clinically licensed in Idaho. She has extensive experience working with children, youth, adults, and families in university mental health, wilderness therapy, experiential therapy, school-based mental health, private practice, juvenile justice, and currently as the Blaine County School District mental health coordinator and therapist. She also co-leads the 5B Suicide Prevention Alliance and participates in the Idaho Resiliency Project. Her passion is early identification, prevention, and destigmatization of mental health in the educational system, communities, and our nation. She brings resiliency skill building opportunities, utilizing the Community Resiliency Model, offering trainings to students, teachers, nonprofit organizations, first responders, and communities at large, and has responded to crises like the Dayton, Ohio shooting, utilizing the model as a postvention tool. She also provides ongoing consultation, training, and support for clinicians, school staff, nonprofits, and individuals. Obtaining a master's degree from a social justice focused program, she continually seeks the use of this framework to inform all of her work. And now I'm proud to present Laurie Strand, facilitating an abbreviated Community Resilience Model training.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. Let me just share my screen really quick. Great to be with you all today. All right. Of course, something exciting to happen. Beginning. There we go. It's always like the most amazing thing about doing all of these presentations online now is that I have to use all my skills usually right away at the very beginning, because it's like just praying that everything comes together in those first initial moments. So hello. Yeah, thank you for the nice introduction. I'm so excited to be presenting Mental Health in the Mountains. I have such passion for the types of communities that we all live in. I live in Haley Ketchum area, which is a mountain town in central Idaho. Lots of skiing, tourism, all of those things. It seems like a lot of your communities are also, that you are also a part of. So I think we have a lot in common. Hopefully can share some of our experiences with each other today. Just with your introduction, one thing I do want to say is that this is a very abbreviated introduction to this model. I just got finished doing a 2-day training with some people in Madison, Wisconsin. So there's, so many different kind of levels of the training. So this is quite abbreviated, but you will leave here 100% with tools on regulating the nervous system. So rest assured that way. I also want to say that I am a white woman who was born and raised in Idaho. I've lived only in Alaska and Montana and Utah and Colorado, and so my perspective and view is going to be skewed that way as a woman who's grown up in those places. So I hope that if there's any part of this presentation that feels like it is not inclusive or equitable, I would hope that you could reach out to me and let me know where I can grow. So before I get going anymore, though, I would love to know, I looked through the list of participants, but I'd love to know who was actually able to join the call today, just so that I have some idea who I'll be talking to. So Shannon's going to put up a poll on your computer really quick. You can just tell me who you are. The community resiliency model, just as you're filling this out, is the reason that I love it so much is that it isn't a clinical model. It is a model that's focused on everyone. I was in mental health for a while, and a couple years ago, after I'd been in for a little over 10 years, I had felt like I might have to not be a part of it anymore, because I wasn't seeing the results that I kept thinking I was supposed to be seeing, that I would see people be able to heal, that people were going to not be reliant on me. I kept seeing that people were having to come back to me for support, or that when I was in school-based mental health, that students would have to come to me during the day to regulate. And I was getting a little disheartened at mental health in general. And when I came across this model, I was totally and completely recharged and feel like I can actually stay in this profession for the rest of my life now, for my working years, because it doesn't rely on clinicians. There's a time and place for a clinician, of course, but it doesn't rely on me. It relies on the internal wisdom and strength of humans to recover and heal. And yeah, sometimes we need support, exactly. But I felt really energized by this idea that it is a body-based model that really relies on human strength. So let me see, we have educators, mental health counselors, nonprofits, administrators, risk, safety, and other. Okay, great. That is just super helpful for me to know who I'm talking to. I've given presentations to all different demographics, but it'll help me just see who I'm talking to today. So this model is under the organization called the Trauma Resiliency Institute, and there's two models under that. There's the Community Resiliency Model, which I'm going to be talking to you about today, and then there's the Trauma Resiliency Model. The Trauma Resiliency Model is a clinician model, which is the base of it is the Community Resiliency Model. It just adds in some additional skills that clinicians use for trauma reprocessing. All right, so today I'm going to talk throughout it what my involvement is with this model, both locally and nationally. I really strongly believe that this model is not an additional thing that you're going to have to figure out what to do with, or that you're going to have to teach it as a standalone. In my work and with those that I teach, we find that it is a very foundational tool. It's that tool that we put all the other tools on top of. It holds that strong, steady foundation to do all of the rest of our work. Throughout the rest of the presentation, I'll have some research sprinkled in there throughout. I want you to think about this presentation today as a first place for you to start. I often, when I go to trainings, I know that I instantly try to think about the populations that I work with. And today I want you to think of this model as you're putting your mask on first, right? That before you can help other people, we have to be able to read our nervous systems, to understand how our nervous systems work first. Once we can embody that and it becomes part of us, it's much, much easier to teach the model. The reason I have this other districts in here, this is part of another presentation I've done, is that there's other school districts that are implementing this. And I did a training for Wake County in North Carolina. And what they're doing there with their entire school district is doing it, they've implemented it just with staff for an entire year. And so this is, I think I just said this, but one of the largest school districts in the country. And so they're having all of their staff work on just implementing it for themselves first before they are going to start teaching them how to implement it with students. We're going to talk about something called the resiliency zone, which is kind of the base of the model. You'll leave today learning the basic 3 skills and the help now skills. So you'll learn 4 of the 6 skills today. And then throughout, I'll just sprinkle out some of the whys. So we'll kind of bounce back and forth between content and skill building, just so we can keep it variable. Also, if you are a multitasker on webinars like I am, it will be hard for you to learn the skills because it is a biologically based model, and it's really hard to learn the skills unless we're staying present with content or with what's happening with our experience. Again, you do whatever you need to do today as you're listening to this webinar, but just putting that out there for people like me. Okay, so really quick, um, I feel like this term resiliency is a bit overused currently. It's kind of like that term empowerment was the past few years, where everyone was kind of empowering everyone, and everyone needs to be empowered, and we have to learn tools to empower each other and go to empowering workshops, etc. And I feel like the same thing's happening with resiliency. It's like the same thing. Everybody needs to be resilient. Kids are resilient. We need to learn how to become more resilient. And so when we use terms like that and we forget kind of what they inherently mean, they start to lose a little bit of value. And so right now I just want to take a second, if you could just pop in the chat really quick about what your definition of resiliency is, or maybe even just some key terms that come to mind when you think of resiliency. I'll go ahead and read some of those off as they start showing up. All right, so I see hope, the ability to bounce back after experiencing hardship. Yeah, bounce back. Moving forward through adversity and thriving. Continuing on in the face of adversity. Yes, excellent. All of these things. So for me, when I just hear you putting words, putting definitions or meaning to this word, it brings its power back. And I don't know about you, but all of those things, bouncing back, oh, here's another one, learning and preparing for next time, continuing on in the face of adversity, all of these things, I would really love to embody all of those things. I would really love those to be characteristics that I carry with me. And when I think about it in those terms, it really helps bring the power back to that word resiliency and what we're going to really be talking about today. So just one more question to follow that up is, what is your definition of community resiliency? How does it change when we put the word community in front of it, or does it for you? So again, if you want to just comment in the chat bar about what the word community does in front of that word resiliency. How groups of people overcome trauma and stress, and then just wrote 2020. Yes, shared support system. Yeah, nice. Rebuilding the connections the community once had after adversity. Yeah, so all of these things that you've written here, and it's one of my favorite things about the model in general, is that these are very active terms that you've put in front of the word resiliency, right? And even the way that you define resiliency is very active. It's not something that, well, we just have resiliency or we don't and we stop there. It's a very active process to continue being resilient. I'm sure all of us know that in one area or another we're more resilient, in some areas we're less resilient. And the same thing goes for our community, just that rebuilding piece, right? It's a constant active process that we have to go in, even as a community, in order to build collective resiliency. So when I use the term we, which I will use, that is the Trauma Resource Institute. And the co-founder of the Institute, her name is Elaine Miller-Karras, and she defines resiliency as an individuals and communities' ability to identify and use individual and collective strengths and living fully with compassion in the present moment, and to thrive while managing the activities of daily living. So again, it's this very active process that we're engaging in, resiliency is. So before we continue and get into the nuts and bolts, we just have a couple more of these kinds of slides. I'd love it again if you would just pop into the chat what or who uplifts you, what or who gives you strength, and what or who gets you through hard times. And so they're not so much individual questions but as collective responses to things like this. Yes, pets. Yes. What else? Meditation, great. Faith, family. My group of peers who meet bi-monthly to connect and check in. Family and friends, music groups, yoga, journaling, my inner circle, the students I work with in the community. Beautiful. Yeah. So God, my children, and breathing techniques. Yeah. Oh, I love hearing all those things that I can feel it in my body a little bit, just relaxing as I read the things that you're writing. Very similar for me. I have my pets, my family, nature, being able to walk outside and just be seeing the natural world is incredibly uplifting for me. So thank you for sharing that. We'll come back to some of those responses in a little while. So the Community Resiliency Model, or how I'm going to refer to it most of the time today is CRIM, is a set of 6 skills to increase our sense of well-being. These skills that we'll talk about today are derived from neuroscience. It's a biological-based model. We use what's called the language of sensation. So we move away from these feeling words and we talk more about how these feelings land in our bodies. And this is because this is how we talk and relate to our nervous system. Oftentimes at the beginning, people will be like, what is this lady talking about? But I promise, just bear with me a little bit and it will come together. So also, I've talked about this resiliency zone word, and one of our goals is to widen our resiliency zone so that we can better handle life stressors. It also helps us when we understand when we're in our zone, we can return to it more rapidly, or we can get back into it more quickly if we've bumped out. There's also 6 skills of CRIM. The first one is tracking, and tracking is the base for all of the skills. We use tracking with all the 5 other skills. So I often explain it this way, that tracking is the palm of my hand. It's how I remember it. And then we go to resourcing, which is always the first skill that we teach. Grounding, gesturing, help now, and shift and stay. The 4 that you see underlined are the 4 that we'll go over today. So I wanted to show this because there are a lot of people on the call that are in the helping profession. And it's more just to show you that the training that you'll be going through today is roughly the same. It's about an hour shorter than the one that these nurses were given, but it's very similar. I talked to the research developer of this randomized controlled trial just a couple days ago, and she helped me put together a lot of the trainings I've been doing this fall. So just from this, the biggest takeaway, which isn't going to blow anyone's mind, but if nurses feel better, they give better care. And so many of us that I see that are on this call today are in that caregiver realm, right? We are in the healthcare profession. We're in the helper positions. We are mental health counselors or therapists. We're clergy members. And so we fall often into these same categories of nurses. They call us helping professionals, right? And so with a 3-hour class a year later, nurses were able to report that they had overall improved well-being from using these skills, and that their secondary traumatic stress or vicarious trauma that they had experienced had been reduced, as well as their physical symptoms. So after learning the skills, they talked about the kind of what skills they were able to implement and when did they use these skills the most. So as we're going through this, you can start to think about the different situations that you start to feel yourself bump out of your zone, or maybe feel like the feelings become unmanageable, or the sensations in your body start to feel overwhelming. And maybe which of the skills are going to work best for you. So why is this important for us to learn? So right now I'm spending a lot of my time talking to teachers and staff. So I was able to teach my entire school district staff this year. There's this funny joke to never not take advantage of a good pandemic. Well, our district is doing that right now. So luckily I was able to go in and really help teachers learn how to regulate themselves before welcoming in students into the classroom, because everyone is stressed out, no matter if you're excited to go back or not. And so the single best predictor of positive outcomes for children is the coping ability of significant adults. And this is really profound for me, and one of the reasons that keeps me going to work every day is just that my ability ability to impact someone can purely be through the fact of how I regulate and how I can show that I can cope in the face of adversity. So this is one of our favorite slides of the presentation. And I want to be really honest here that a lot of times, and this, I want you to think about just like your life in general with your kids or partners or friends, as well as the people that we all work with, right? So oftentimes when we get really frustrated with someone, we jump to this conventional assumption of people, right? That people are bad, people are punished, I'm not going to talk to them, they need disciplined, people don't care, they're doing this to me. And we go to this place of like, what's wrong with you, right? How many times have we heard that word of like, that person's crazy or something's wrong with them, right? So that's kind of one of our go-tos, I think, is just this conventional way of assuming things about people. Oftentimes, I know when I can like step back off the cliff and think, okay, let me think about this person. Let me think about their situation. Let me find out what their day was like. Let me find out what's going on with this student, what they're living in, what they have gone through. We can come back to this place of, a lot of people care but lack understanding or maybe lack some skills, right? Again, resiliency isn't something that you just have all the time in all your situations. It's also about learned skills. We need effective interventions, right? So whether that's meeting couple, right? Sometimes we need things to help us work through things, or it's a set of skills that work for our body to help calm us. And it takes us to this question of what happened to you. It brings awareness to the situation. And trauma-informed trainings have been really, really big, and they're very, very important. And this is also the Community Resiliency Model trainings. They're all trauma-informed trainings, but we feel like we want to go one step further. And what that means is that we go to becoming resiliency informed. And this is what I've talked about already. It's a very action-oriented place. So we go more towards this idea that people are resilient, right? That people need our compassion as they learn new skills, and any person can learn self-regulation skills. And that ultimately we want to go to this place of what's right with you and what are your strengths. I also think about if somebody just learned my stories, right? I would never want them to stop there. I would want to see them that I've gone on, been able to get an education, that now I teach people things, right? I don't want to stop at my awareness. I want to be able to move into the action of my life, and I want other people to know that I can do the same thing too. I've taught this model to a lot of students, and one time I was at a alternative high school showing this slide, and I asked them about this difference, and they talked about how often they're asked to share their stories, but sometimes when they feel like they share their stories that they're pitied, or that someone feels like, oh man, we can't expect as much out of you. I fully believe in meeting everyone where they are, and that everyone needs to be met with interventions that suit where they are. But I also strongly believe that we set those bars high. And then when students or anyone rises up to meet them, that we continue to increase those expectations and standards. And so, again, it's really this place of building strengths. So what is the resiliency zone? We're going to get into the nuts and bolts of the model right now. So the resiliency zone is a place, I explain it, where it's either called the resiliency zone or the okay zone. And the resiliency zone is a place where I can be happy, mad, scared, frustrated, angry, annoyed, but I can be in control. I can feel that I can handle it. I'm not going to harm anyone else or myself with word, action, or deed. And so it's a place where I feel like the decisions I'm going to make are not only going to benefit me or be healthy to me, but be healthy for other people as well. However, I can't always make it through the day that way. And sometimes things happen that trigger me, right? So a stressful event, a traumatic event that will bump me out of my zone, or that bump all of us out of our zone, right? All of us react these ways. And I can either bump high, where I may become edgy or irritable or manic or have panic attacks or anxiety attacks or have really big anger. And so I can bump in these big ways, right, where my emotions become really big and unmanageable, but more outward oftentimes. Or I can bump low, where I may we say, overwhelmed in the river of sadness, right? Where I feel like I want to isolate. I can be incredibly tired, fatigued. I may just feel numb. We can bump between the two. So one of my favorite things to do is to, and this often happens when I haven't slept enough, right? I may lash out at someone, oftentimes the people that I love the most, and then I'll feel so terrible that I did something like that, and I will bump low and want to isolate and separate myself from them because I feel so bad about what I've done, shameful. And so we can really fluctuate between these areas. So our goal here today is to talk about being able to widen this zone and also be able to read our nervous system so that we know when we're in our zone and when we may be getting close to bumping out, or if we are out, how we can get ourselves back in. So people can have narrow or wide resilience zones. So I'm sure all of us know people who it feels like their zone is small, right? Small things can really bump their nervous system, right? Dysregulate them. Or some people that you're like, man, they are cool as a cucumber all the time. They have the deepest resiliency zone. Nothing seems to really faze them, and they seem pretty level. There's also situations. I feel like these change constantly during the day, right? So if I go to bed too late and I don't get up when my alarm goes off, and I don't get outside and take my pup for a walk in the morning or get some activity in or take care of myself, my resiliency zone when I walk into my building is much smaller, right? And one of the things I need to always remind myself that if my resiliency zone is smaller, that means it's probably going to affect other people because I'm not going to be able to bounce back as quickly as I'd like to. Whereas when I go to bed when I know is best for me, when I get up on time, even though every morning when my alarm goes off, I'm still just like, for real. When I do all those things, I have a deeper resiliency zone. I also think about this with humans. There's some relationships that we have. The relationships are really easy, right? We trust each other. We can navigate them well. If issues come up, we know how to work with them. And then there's people that maybe even just seeing them can get us, our resiliency zone shrinks right away, and we have to work really hard, right, to stay in our zone when we're with them. So this constantly fluctuates all day long, situation to situation. This is the resiliency zone that a friend of mine, co-teacher, and I developed, which we liked to, when we share in the community, when we meet together, we have monthly boosters and we share this and we check in with one another about where we are. And we do this because it can show that our resiliency zone has so many parts to it, right? That green part, 0, we often say, okay, I'm really centered. I feel like I'm there. 1 or a negative 1, right? I may be nearing one or the thing or the other, or I may just have a lot of energy in my body. And maybe at a 1, I can't say that I'm at a 0 because I have a lot of energy. But a reminder is that green zone is not happy zone, right? It just means I can experience the myriad of emotions, but I can handle it. And then the high and the low zone, for me, they have a lot of different places, right? Like at a 2, I may be bumped out, but I'm not going to respond the same way that I might if I'm at a 5. And so you can kind of start to think in your head about where you match on these zones with different emotions. We also bring our body to it into it right away. So I'm just going to tell you about where I am on this zone and how I know, not using feeling words, but using sensation words. And don't worry, we're going to keep getting into this as we go. But I'm going to say that right now I'm at a 1. And the reason that I know I'm at a 1 is because I have a lot of energy in my body right now because I'm on a call, a webinar. I can't see anyone, so it's hard to gauge my audience right now, right? And so I'm trying to perform a little bit so that I can keep your interest. So I have a little bit of tension in my chest, but it's not unpleasant. It's fine. It's just there. And I have a lot more energy than I might if I was just sitting home at the end of the day. I feel like I can handle it and manage it if something were to happen. And yeah, so we start to put some sensation words. So you can check for a minute just to see where you might be in this zone. And I just took a big breath. Oftentimes what I notice and what other people have commented on is just by looking at the resiliency zone helps us check in for a second. And often when we just take a pause to check in, we oftentimes fall into our zone just a little bit deeper just by noticing where we are. All right. So a big piece to this model is our nervous system. And we love to call it the elegant design of the nervous system because that is what it is. It's an incredibly responsive system that we're so grateful that we have because it does so much without us even having to talk to it or communicate with it at all. So the community resiliency model's focus is on biology and on the human nervous system. And so there's common reactions that all of us have to stress and trauma. And all of our bodies react in one way or another to stress and trauma. And it affects our body, our mind, and our spirit. And so a big focus of CRIM is to help us learn to read our nervous system so that we can return to a zone of well-being faster. And so this is through these wellness skills that we've talked about. Okay, so I'm going to stand up and look really silly for a second because I want to show you how this works a little bit. And it's easier to understand it if you do something active. So if you are at home, I'm going to ask you to stand up. Nobody can see you, so you can do this wherever you are, and no one's going to think you're silly. So on the count of 3, I want you to start running in place. Thank you, Shannon. Okay, let's start. So we're running in place here. Okay, so as we're running in place, our autonomic nervous system is kicking in. The sympathetic nervous system prepares for action right now. So as I'm running, my breathing rate is increasing, my heart rate is increasing, my blood pressure is going up, I'm starting to sweat a little, and my digestion and saliva are slowing down, right? And then if I stop, my brake pedal comes on. My parasympathetic nervous system starts, right? And I can notice, oh, my breathing becomes a little bit deeper. My heart rate's going to continue to slow. My blood pressure is going to go down. My temperature is going to reduce. And hopefully my digestion and my saliva is going to come back on. It's usually because I'm going to take a drink right after we do something active, right? Take a drink. It signals to our digestion, okay, we're calming down. Parasympathetic nervous system can take over. Okay, have a seat. So we talk about the nervous system as having a gas and a brake pedal. One is not better than the other. They work simultaneously together. I want my sympathetic nervous system to react because when I'm on a run or doing something active or needing some energy for flight, fight, or freeze, I want my sympathetic nervous system to kick in, right? And then I want the same thing to happen when I get done, when I sit down at the end of the day or after some sort of activity. I want that brake pedal to come on, right? I want everything to slow down and I want that digestion to come back on. These all happen unconsciously. We don't do anything to make this happen. And if you think about it, you probably can think about some emotions that mimic the sympathetic nervous system, preparing for action, right? So if you think about fear or anger or excitement, that oftentimes the parasympathetic nervous system takes over a little bit more, right? Our heart rate ramps up. We can feel tension in our muscles. We can feel temperature increase, right? And then again, after we're done, we want that to decrease. We want those things to be able to level out again. And what can happen is that we can get stuck with the sympathetic on. And that's just like that resiliency zone that we talked about. Sometimes we can get stuck in those high places where that sympathetic nervous system is kicked in, but we're really not needing it to kick in. We're in a fight response, and our body's reacting to something that it's finding fearful, right? And we're finding it really hard to get back down into our nervous system or into our resiliency zone. And one of the primary things that we want to talk about, why we talk about the nervous system, why it's focused on the mental or on the nervous system, is that this is all about biology. This is not about mental weakness, right? So all of our nervous systems just then responded when we ran in place, right? It wasn't that one person's nervous system responded and another's didn't. All of those things have to happen to some degree or another when we bring movement into our bodies, just the same as all of our bodies, to varying degrees, are going to respond when we have a stress or a trauma happen in our life. So with that said, one of we say that this model is adaptable and accessible. And the reason that we talk about that is that every single human has a nervous system. And whether you are a toddler or you are in your 90s, right? Every single human has a nervous system, different cultures, ethnicities, and so that's why we say it's accessible. Now, the way that it's taught and the way that the skills are utilized is going to vary across lifespan and across cultures, ethnicities, genders, etc. It's also really wonderful because it can work with different literacy abilities. You actually don't need to be able to read in order to access this. And we try to keep this model as affordable as we can so that it's able to disseminate, because we call it a community model, and we really want our communities to become more resilient. So before we move on to getting into the skills, I'm just going to define for you how the Trauma Resource Institute defines trauma. So our definition is something that happens too much, too fast, or too little, or too much for too long. So too much, too fast could be maybe an automobile accident, something like that. Or too little or too much for too long could be someone experiencing neglect, right? Or a child living in a domestic violent home. The biggest part of this definition is that perception is key. So my nervous system is going to read stress and trauma different than your nervous system is going to read it. And it doesn't matter how I perceive it or how you perceive it, I just do. And so that old saying of, I don't know why they can't just get over it, right? It puts that into perspective. It's that it doesn't matter what you think about it. It only matters what someone else believes or how their body is responding to a particular stress or trauma. We can see this with what's going on in our world today, right? So we talked about too much, too fast being that shock element, something that overwhelms the nervous system really quickly. And we can see this with COVID, with too little for too long. We see it in some groups of people, especially our aging community, right? Where potentially for some of that demographic, socializing was already at a minimum. And then we put COVID on top of this. And that can be too little for too long of not having human interaction. And that can be incredibly stressful and traumatic. Or the opposite extreme can be too much for too long, right? How many of us have had the same conversation over and over about, do you think we should go there? Like, is it safe? Well, what's their program like? Well, what do you think? Well, and we have just this ongoing stress of whenever we kind of leave the house, we have to have kind of all these protocols in place. Luckily, hopefully for you, it's getting easier and easier, but it's like this continual thing that we're confronted with all the time. Again, I want to put it into context too, that there's a lot of people that too little for too long or too much for too long can also look like worrying about food, housing, and jobs. And this can be incredibly traumatic for not only the person, but the entire family system that's going through that. Another piece that affects kind of our nervous systems in general, and trauma. We used to define trauma in different categories, of one being bigger than the other. And now we just say trauma is trauma, and the way you perceive it and your body perceives it is actually what's most important. However, there's this other piece that's added to it, and it's this life experience piece, right? So in my community, in our community, we have our population is roughly 40 to 45% Latinx. And a lot of our Latino community helps in many of our service industry employment areas. And so during this COVID crisis, there's been a huge reduction in employment. And I've put this into context with a lot of people in our community, no matter where you are in the political spectrum, just giving you an idea of what a family may be going through, an individual or a child. If a parent potentially does not have legal papers to be in our country, then, earlier this year, we were really dealing a lot with kids coming to school worrying that their kids were, or that their parents were going to be gone when they came home from school because of what was going on with ICE raids. And so then we come to current day. So we have a child who's already worried about a parent potentially being taken from the home, and then a parent potentially losing a job. And so lack of income, potentially lack of becoming food insecure. And then on top of it, potentially worrying if they get ill, that they are worried about receiving medical access because of potentially not having identification, or feeling like if they do, it puts them more at risk for potentially becoming deported. And so then we have worries about not being able to stay healthy if someone becomes ill in the family. And so just that, to start out a day of a child's day, or any person's day, or a family's day, if that's where they're starting from, think how challenging that is for their nervous system, just to be starting from there. So life experience has a lot to do with how we move in the world and how we're affected by stress and trauma. Intersectionality, I did have a short video that I was hoping to show you on this, because given the climate of our nation right now, for me, this is a new part of our presentation, and I thought it would be really helpful to show you all.
Laurie, do you want me to show that on my end?
Oh, sorry. Yes, that would be great. I appreciate it. I'll just keep talking a little bit until it pulls up. We have a whole working group that works on diversity and equity in the Trauma Resource Institute. Whenever you're ready.
Okay. Let's try that again. It worked when we tried it out this earlier. There we go.
Oh, okay. There it is.
What is intersectionality? Intersectionality is a way of understanding social relations by examining intersecting forms of discrimination. This means acknowledging that social systems are complicated, and that many forms of oppression, like racism, sexism, and ageism, might be present and active at the same time in a person's life. Everyday approaches to building equality tend to focus on one type of discrimination, for instance, sexism, and then work to address only that specific concern. But while the career of a young, white, and able-bodied woman might improve with gender equality protections, an older, Black, disabled lesbian may continue to be hampered by racism, ageism, ableism, and homophobia in the workplace. Intersectionality is about understanding and addressing all potential roadblocks to an individual or group's well-being. But it's not as simple as just adding up oppressions and addressing each one individually. Racism, sexism, and ableism exist on their own, but when combined, they compound and transform the experience of oppression. Intersectionality acknowledges that unique oppressions exist, but is also dedicated to understanding how they change in combination. The roots of intersectionality lie within the Black feminist movement, with legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw originating the term. Crenshaw felt that anti-racist and feminist movements were both overlooking the unique challenges faced by Black women. She stated that legislation about race is framed to protect Black men, and legislation about sexism is understood to protect white women. So simply combining racism and sexism together does not therefore protect Black women. Intersectional theory is now applied across a range of social divisions and also to understandings of domination, such as those associated with whiteness, masculinity, and heterosexuality. Intersectionality is not only about multiple identities, and it's not a simple answer to solving problems around equality and diversity. It is, however, an essential framework as we truly engage with issues around privilege and power and work to bring them into the open. Intersectionality means listening to others, examining our own privileges, and asking questions about who may be excluded or adversely affected by our work. As importantly, it means taking measurable action to invite, include, and center the voices and work of marginalized individuals.
All right. So this is not a diversity training, but we believe so strongly in making sure that diversity and equity is part of our conversation that we're continuing to have. And so I just wanted to share that with everybody really quick. I am just needing to find where I left off really quick, and then I can talk again.
So while Laurie's doing that, if you do have any questions that have come up, remember you can use that Q&A section to put those in there and we'll work to get those answered for you.
Yes, please. So yes, again, just thinking, I just want us to all be able to take into account that a lot of times when we're meeting anyone, right? So it's that piece of learning someone's story, right? Learning where their life intersects with one another can give us a really clear picture of what's happening stress-wise in their life, or what kinds of trauma they're just dealing with on a daily basis. So there are, like I talked about earlier, there are common reactions, and it doesn't mean that everyone has these common reactions, but there's common reactions during and after stressful events, right? So by doing these trainings all over the world, we found that they're broken up into these 6 categories of ways that we react after and during a trauma. And so I'm just gonna switch here. So here, all over the world, people experience the same things, is what we found out. And again, the way that I am going to respond is going to be different than the way that Shannon does. But I can look at this list of common reactions and I can find where mine are, right? I can find in the thinking. For me, when I get super stressed out, I get kind of some distorted thoughts and start feeling like everything is going wrong, right? Everything is stressful. Nothing is like happening. I have too much to do all the time, right? Or I may become more aggravated easier if I have some stress, or turn to blame if I'm feeling a situation that I'm really, really stressed out for and feel like it was someone else's fault, right? So we can look at these and know that there are these common reactions. Spiritually, people may feel that they over-identify with their religious belief or spiritual belief, or may go the other way where they feel like a loving God would never do this, or how could God do something like this, right? We can have a lot of physical pain. So children often show this in the chronic stomach and headaches, right? These physical things. We see a lot of people that have high levels of stress or trauma often have GI issues. We all have these common reactions, and there's nothing wrong with us, right? These are common behaviors that all of us experience. Same thing with COVID. We're starting to see that there are common reactions. It doesn't mean that we're all having them, right? So on one side of the spectrum, we're experiencing these financial and housing hardships, right? This huge polarization in our country about different beliefs around processes of staying healthy and well, job layoffs, reduction of being able to be with loved ones, stigma around if you have gotten the virus and feeling shame around getting it and not wanting to say anything, or fear of catching it and spreading it to other people. So there's all of these common reactions that we're having with this pandemic that we're going through. However, there's this beautiful study that was done where somebody researched and asked people what the number one reaction was after a stress or trauma. And the number one thing that came out of this study was that people said resiliency. And all of these possible growth reactions of feeling more strength and courage, or gratitude, right? Finding more gratitude for loved ones or life in general, an increase in faith, being able to be more compassionate to others, having gone through something really difficult. I don't know about you, but when I think about the challenges that have brought me to my knees are the ones that I often look to now when I'm going through something challenging to push me through, to catapult me through the next thing. And somebody said that earlier. It was like learning, so something about learning skills so that the next time I can be more prepared, right? So it's not that we think we're going to learn these skills today because, well, then it's going to fix everything, right? It's so that we know that we can bounce back faster from them. So just keep continuing on about this biological process. So I am assuming that a lot of people on this webinar have probably heard something about the ACEs study. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time because we are going to get into the skills, but I'm going to give a high-level overview because this is kind of the nuts and bolts as to why we believe this model is so effective. So the ACEs study, the first ACEs study, the largest study of its kind, was with 17,000 people. Shannon, did you want to say anything?
I do have
Great.
something to add in. Last
Please.
week, there was a question from one of the attendees, and they wanted to know what Truckee Tahoe could do to start to incorporate more of the ACEs information. So I would just say, as you're presenting this, would you please share any ideas for us as a community to consider implementing the collection of ACEs data or just the response to the most prominent ACEs in a community?
Yeah, yes, thanks. So the first ACE study was an ACE study done with, again, it shows right here, over 17,000 adults. These were adults that were had health insurance and were gainfully employed, and this was in one Southern California community, and I cannot remember the name of the community right now, but
it was down in San Diego.
Thank you, San Diego, Shannon. I appreciate it. And all I have to say is I'm sure there's people on this call that are very well versed. I'm going to just, again, give a really high overview or jump in and put some things in the chat, and I'd love to share them. So nuts and bolts, what came out of this study was that these adverse childhood experiences profoundly impact children's development, and that there is a strong correlation between the number of ACEs someone experienced as a child and their physical and mental health into adulthood. And so these were 10 questions that were asked. And so your ACE score was a 0 to 10, 0 meaning you experienced none of the ACEs, 10 being you experienced all of them. And questions about physical abuse, mental abuse, divorce, etc. And so while that initial ACE study was incredibly informative, right? We just ask these basic 10 questions. We don't factor in any other life situations, and we find these incredible correlations. What we're finding now, and that what this this organization, ACEs Connect, if you haven't been to their website, it's so incredible to learn from them and all the work that they're doing right now. But found out that there is a lot more to humans than just these 10 factors, right? These 10 questions we can ask. And so they're adding in, on top of the household, which is all the domestic violence, physical, emotional abuse, alcoholism, drug use, incarcerated parents, this household piece, they're now factoring in these other levels, right? Communities. So do you live in are you able to afford a safe housing environment for you? Do you have access to clean water, right? I mean, Flint, Michigan always comes to mind every time I say that. If you don't have access to clean water, it's going to affect your physical and your mental health, right? Is your community safe when you walk out, or do you feel like you can walk around your neighborhood? And then the third piece is your environment, and we're seeing that right now every day, right? Our fellow Americans in Oregon and Washington that are dealing, in California, dealing with these terrible fires, and our Americans in the South dealing with these terrible hurricanes and flooding. That will impact you, right? That is a significant stress and trauma. And so we're starting to incorporate these other aspects of life into these ACEs questionnaires. And then we just get to slap a pandemic on it and see what happens. So what we notice, or what we know, is that early adversity has lasting impacts, right? It can impact us with injuries, mental health struggles, reducing our opportunities for education and incomes, increasing our risky behaviors, increasing chronic disease or infectious disease. Research has demonstrated all these different things of strong relationships to ACEs and lifetime drug use. That goes with smoking and alcohol as well. And so in general, we're just showing this ACE link with drug use. This slide I love so much because it's also another slide that gets me to work most every day, which is children ages 6 through 17 who stayed calm when faced with a challenge, reduce the negative impacts of ACEs. And so we believe at the Trauma Resource Institute that the Community Resiliency Model really is an antidote to the ACEs. That when we're able to regulate our nervous system, when we're able to teach resiliency skills, when we're able to model those resiliency skills, that we're going to reduce these negative impacts of ACEs. A lot of these experiences, stress and trauma that we go through, the reason that we kind of build up to this point is that we've talked all about how all of these stresses and traumas impact our nervous system, right? When we experience stress, that's going to set parts of our autonomic nervous system off. And so being able to regulate that, being able to notice it when we're bumping high or low, gives us the skills to be able to stay in our zone and build more resiliency and reduce these impacts. So our takeaways here is that we have physiological responses that begin in childhood. They begin, and some of that research is showing in the womb, right? Especially with like attachment and how we form attachments, etc. Also with stress and things like that. Implications for physical and mental health outcomes last through a lifetime, right? And what are commonly viewed as behavioral and public health problems are often personal efforts to cope with adverse childhood experiences, right? So we think about so many of our neighbors who are struggling with drug use, just that slide that we saw, that so there's such an increase with drug and alcohol use with the increase of ACEs, right? So this thing that we're seeing, something's wrong with you because you can't stop drinking or you can't use drugs, we're often a way to cope with these early adverse childhood experiences that are so lived in our body, or a body-based feeling now. So adversity is not destiny. I think it's the most hopeful thing. So we talk about how sad these ACEs are, but it's almost like the community resiliency model can ameliorate the ACEs, and I love even thinking about that. Just a quick break, just a quick second to check anything you need to. Also, I would really urge you at this moment to pick up your phone and download this app called iChill. The iChill app, what's really great about it is when we talk about being able to utilize the skills, the app not only gives you, it's free, you can find it in the App Store, but the app not only gives you the opportunity to be walked through the skills that we'll go through today by Elaine Miller-Karras, the co-creator, so you get to hear her speak, but it also gives you scripts so that if you want to do more training or practice leading potentially someone through a skill, you could do that. It's really easy to use. It also has kind of some resiliency zone slides that you could show to people if you wanted to show them part of what we learned today. And then here are just for you some real world applications, the places that this model has been used. So it's been used as a prevention and an intervention tool, as well as postvention. So the places that it's been integrated, a lot of academic settings, healthcare settings, families. There's groups that we teach parents at the same time as we teach children. At our district, we have a psychological first aid team or a crisis response team, and this model is our what we use for all of our intervention and postventions in the face of a crisis. When we have deaths of students, it's how we mobilize our teams to work with our students and our staff. It's also used in postvention. Like I said, I was able to go to Dayton, Ohio last year after the unfortunate shootings there and work with some first responders and community members on how to work with our nervous systems to be able to regulate after incidents like this happen. I've taught a lot of firefighters and first responders these skills, as they are so first on that front line, and not only do they need a way to heal after experiencing the extreme trauma that they witness, but also being able to keep themselves regulated in the moment. So I'm happy to follow up with anyone about this. That's one of my resources I'm going to talk about in a second. Lucy, my dog. So now we're getting into the skills. Here we go. I do just want to see if there's any questions really quick about any of that information that we just went over. That's a lot of information to cover in an hour. Yes, Caroline, it's totally incredible. Thanks for saying that. It's a really great app. Okay. Well, I'll keep cruising. Please feel free to ask a question at any point. All right, so the skills, here we go. Kind of talked about the why, and hopefully you understand some of the why behind it. We're gonna get into talking about the brain in a little bit, but let's do some skills first, and then we'll go back to how the brain and the three organizational principles of the brain factor into why this model works from a neuroscience perspective. So like I stated at the beginning, apply your resiliency mask first, to learn these skills first so that you can stay in your zone, stay regulated, and then you're able to help others. So we're going to talk first about tracking, resourcing, and grounding. And this is what we call the basic three of the model. So tracking is simply reading the nervous system. And you do this every day, all day. You just you probably don't call it tracking, right? So tracking can be when you're in the sun and you move to the shade because you're getting hot, or you feel your stomach grumbling and so you get some food because you're hungry or thirsty. So we do all of these things all day. You have an itch, you scratch it, or vice versa, right? So we track all day long. When we are hiking and we feel our heart rate increase so much and our breathing becomes so shallow that we need to take a pause, we're tracking that to know that we need to take a second and pause. So tracking is the foundation for helping us stabilize the nervous system. It's noticing or paying attention to sensations, and that means we're paying attention to what's happening in the present moment. And the reason that we do that is because when we can tell the difference between stress and well-being, we have a choice. And I like to say that it's kind of what we pay attention to grows, right? So if I have, and no one should see my garden right now, or this would not be a good metaphor, but when we plant a garden, if we plant a garden and then we just start watering the weeds that come up, that's what's going to come up, right? But if we water the plants that we want to plant, we pick the weeds along the way, the weeds are always going to be there. There's just always going to be weeds. That's part of the deal, right? But hopefully, because we're tending to the fruit and the vegetables or the flowers that we want to grow, those are going to become more prolific. So at this point, I always like to say, I am not going to talk to you today about just think positive thoughts and everything's going to be okay, right? I do believe that there's power in our thoughts for sure, and we'll talk about that, but there's also some neuroscience behind it. The other piece next to this is that I don't ever want people to ignore that there's something maybe unpleasant going on, right? We're not trying to avoid anything or pretend that life is just full of roses and sunshine, because that isn't our human experience. It's very full. However, all we're talking about here is being able to shift, being able to see that, yes, there are weeds and there's something else over here that is happening at the same time. My favorite saying in the community resiliency model is, what else is true, right? So as I'm experiencing this right now, what else is true? What else is true at the same moment? So the same thing here. When we learn to discern the differences between sensations of distress and well-being, we begin to have a choice of what we can pay attention to on the inside. So it's what fires together, wires together. And what that means is, I often think of things that go hand in hand together. And as I start explaining some of these, I want you to think in your own life, what things are really wired hard together. So when I take kids camping, right, there is never a time I've ever been camping with kids where they've been like, oh, can we have s'mores, right? Every single time. It's one of the first things that comes out of their mouth is like, are we having s'mores, right? And so that's really fired together or wired together in their brain. Another thing could be like going to a movie theater and having popcorn, right? I can't imagine going to a movie theater and not having popcorn. It just seems like I just couldn't do it. And there's also other things that are more hardwired together, right? Like for some people, stress triggers a response to maybe have a drink, right? But those things are really hardwired together. Or for some people, what they know when they're experiencing stress, what they've started to wire together is that they need to go take a break, right? They need to go take a walk. They need to go breathe, something like that. So start thinking in your life, those things that kind of happen automatically now that you don't really think about. They're just so wired together. So when we talk about tracking, I want you to think of a few different things. I'm actually going to go to this next slide really quick. What's going on with your heart rate? What's going on with your breathing? What's going on with your muscle tension? What's going on with your temperature? Those are kind of the four things I start to have people think about as they begin to track. And I'm going to move back here. So a lot of times when we're tracking sensations, stress and trauma sensations often have different sensations than, say, resiliency sensations. So I'll just give an example. I was driving I drive in my community. One of our schools is about 20 miles away. And so I was driving there to go see some students, and it was raining. And my car started hydroplaning. And if anyone's hydroplaned, you know, for a second, you're just at the mercy of hoping that your car doesn't turn, right? And so immediately my heart rate increases, my muscles become really tense, right? And I'm in a fight response. I'm just holding on. And as I come through, luckily my car doesn't turn and I hit the pavement. And as I hit the pavement, the first thing I do, right, is take a giant breath. I'm like, oh my gosh, right? So instantly I kind of move more into this resiliency place. I can feel it right now, right? I take a breath. And just so you know, everything was fine. Nothing happened. And because I know this model, I pulled over to the side of the road. And I sit there for just a second, and I all of a sudden like feel myself start trembling, right? Shaking a little bit. And that's a release sensation that my body was going through to get rid of that stress or trauma. We see this a lot with animals, right? When dogs play with each other and they play really rough and they're like, rah, rah, rah. When they separate from each other, a lot of times they'll shake, right? And that is them regulating their nervous system again. Or we see it when prey gets chased by a predator. A lot of times like a prey may fall over, right? And they may go into a freeze response. And then as they wait and the predator leaves and they get back up, you may watch them shake, or as they're on the ground, they may shake a little bit. And so, again, our nervous system is designed to kind of have these natural biological responses. I needed to really be in control and be as laser focused as I could, right? But on the other side, I didn't want to have my heart rate still increased. I didn't want to have those tense muscles. And so I could get to come down the other side. Those release sensations really help us release that tension and that stress from our body for good. I am having a real resiliency moment in my household where I'm needing to take a bone away from my dog because it's really starting to bump me a little bit high in my zone because I can't concentrate on my presentation. So one moment. This is Lucy. She's naughty and gonna go out of the room now. Okay, here you go. This is the real world of COVID, right? Okay. So this slide, I really love too, is because it talks about people asking to track their sensations related to an emotion. So you can think about this too. Think about the places in your body where happiness lives, or love, or surprise, right? What parts of your body really light up. And so this wasn't a scan on temperature at all. This was actually people who were asked where these sensation resonate in their body. And so as we can see, a lot of them are really similar, right? Anger and fear. I know for me, anger resonates in my chest, right? But so does love, right? But the sensations associated with them are very different, where love feels more expansive for me, or happiness feels like I have more calm here. So this just shows that we do have corresponding sensations and emotions. We do have corresponding sensations to the emotions that we're experiencing in our bodies. We can also use other words like fluttery. I work with some students who had lost a classmate, and we were doing some skill work, and they were remarking on sensations after we had done what's called resourcing, and we'll do this next. And they commented on having either butterflies in their stomach, which they found to be very pleasant, right? That light fluttery feeling we get, or moths in their stomach, which was that uneasy yuckiness that we can get in our bellies. And I loved that description of it. So as we start to play with tracking, we start to develop a sensation vocabulary. So we're going to do that right now. So I want you to just pick up something next to you. It could be anything. So I'm going to pick up something in my hand, but I'm not going to show it to you, because the goal is not for you to guess what my object is. The goal is just for you to describe it using sensation language. So Shannon, I'm probably going to put you on the spot in a second, okay?
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to tell you my item is soft and smooth and cool and light and rigid and soft. And I don't want you to guess it. I'm just trying to put some sensation language together. So I would love it if you would try the same thing.
Okay. My object is thin and firm. It's smooth and light and flexible.
Perfect. Thank you. So again, we often get really cognitive, right? When we start tracking, and you'll notice it when we go to resourcing. You want to really talk about the emotions that are tied with it instead of checking into the sensations. And oddly enough, before we have language for our emotions, we have a corresponding sensation in our bodies. But we've become so kind of separated from this, and we so want to talk about this cognitive piece or really tell what's happening or try to figure out why we're experiencing or what it is. And so it's our automatic now to go towards this. Just think of how many times we ask, what are you feeling? And I often say, let's get away from the F word. We're going to go to sensing words. Okay. So oftentimes it's easiest to understand tracking in our bodies when we do an activity called resourcing. So I'm going to invite you to find a piece of paper and a pen because we're going to do a little writing exercise. And mine was chapstick and I'm going to put it on. Smooth. Okay. So I'm going to, before I lead you through a resourcing activity, I'm just going to explain what the heck resourcing is. So resourcing is a person, place, thing, experience, hobby, characteristic, anything that when you think about it, it brings you a sense of joy, peace, or calm. So we talked about this earlier, right? Some of the questions I asked you at the beginning is what gives you strength, what uplifts you, what gets you through hard times. Oftentimes these are our resources. So we've all talked about these things, but this is how the community resource what we call it is as a resource. So they can be in external resources, which are a lot of things I just talked to you about. So hobbies, experiences, people, animals, skills that we have, or they could be internal resources. So say I really love to quilt or cook or sew, right? And my hands are a source of strength for me. That when I think about all the beautiful things I create with them, I just feel a sense of joy or peace or courage or strength. It could be my legs because I'm a runner and I feel that they're powerful and get me up so many hills or so many places I want to go. Or they can be imagined. A lot of times I work with people who, when I ask them if they have a resource, they will say, no, I don't have anything, right? And so I may say, if you were to imagine yourself having one, what would that be? For children, it can be their stuffed animals, are often really real to them, or could be blankets. Those can often be resources as well. So our brain is super fascinating in the way that often when we start thinking about things that bring us a lot of joy, our brain has this strong bias towards finding things wrong. So, and the way I like to describe that is I bet on this training that you've already had 3 problems that aren't real that you've tried to fix, right? Because the brain is just fascinated with trying to come up with issues that might happen and then try to fix them. It also can be the place where I'll just use my personal example. I have some back pain today, right? And it's one small area of my back, right? But I don't have pain anywhere else in my whole body. But never is my brain like, wow, my upper arm just feels really calm today and just feels like really nice. It's just relaxed. No, my brain goes to my back and tries to figure out all the things that I can do differently or that I've done to create it or anything like that. Just kind of ruminates there. So it has this strong desire to keep me safe. And unfortunately, it was evolutionarily really helpful a long time ago, but it just hasn't tamped down enough. And so it's still pretty revved up now, this, and we'll talk about this part of the brain as we get into here. But one of the things we're going to do is called resource intensification. So when we get into the part where I ask you to explain your resource, so I want you to go into a lot of detail because the brain will try to override you. And when the brain tries to override you, I just often say to my brain, like, yeah, it's not perfect. This resource isn't perfect, but I'm gonna also look at these places that my resource still brings me a lot of strength or hope or courage or joy, right? So sometimes, like I said, when we're talking about them, and this can be when we're in conversation with other people, we can shift away from pleasant sensations into uncomfortable sensations. And so I'll be walking you through this, and I'm just going to have you shift back to somewhere that feels more pleasant or neutral in your body if you're experiencing something that's feeling a little unpleasant. And so oftentimes, if we get overwhelmed that something doesn't feel pleasant, I often think about really neutral places in my body if I feel kind of overwhelmed. And those can be like the top of my head, the tips of my fingers, my toes. Sometimes I feel them wiggle in my shoes, and sometimes that can just bring me enough back. But a lot of times it could be my upper arm, right? Things like that. And I promise you this will make more sense as we get into it. If you're confused right now, you're perfect. You're right where you should be because it is confusing and it's going to come together here really shortly. So I'm going to lead you now through a resourcing activity. So I'm going to invite you to get your piece of paper out. And I want you to write down 3 things that bring you a sense of joy, peace, or calm. It can be an activity, a hobby, an experience, a place. I'm going to invite you to not use a person right now. People often are challenging the first time we're doing this or when we're starting to develop it because humans are really complicated. And oftentimes our brain goes to those negative places a little faster if we don't have some experience with it. So I'm going to give you a second to write 3 or 4 down. And then I want you to just circle one. You're going to just pick one. It's not the best one. Don't worry. I want you to be able to use them later because we need to build lots of resources. And now I want you to take a minute and you're going to write about it. And I literally am going to give you 1 minute here in a second. But what I want you to think about is having like a total blank canvas. Okay. So it's like you're an artist and you just have a blank wall and you're going to create a picture. So I want you to put as many senses into this as possible as you're writing. What you smell, what you hear, what you taste, what you see. If you're outside, what do you notice? Is there sunshine on your body? What you're doing, all of the pieces that you can build onto this canvas with colors, sights, smells, tastes, etc. And if it's a very general resource, like hiking, think of something about a certain time that you've done it. Get a little bit more, pinpoint the resource a little bit longer, or a little, pinpoint it, make it a little more narrow. Okay, I'm going to give you 1 minute to do this. If writing doesn't work for you, you're always welcome to just close your eyes and bring this to mind. You can also draw. You can also type on your computer or your phone. And as you're staying present with this resource that you're writing about, continuing to bring your mind to this resource, notice what's happening inside of you as you think about the resource. As you're writing about it, notice those sensations of your heart rate, your temperature, your breathing. All right, and now I'm going to invite you to stop and just read that resource for a moment. Just read what you wrote and bring that resource to your mind's eye. You can also close your eyes when you're done reading. And just notice any sensations on the inside that are more neutral or pleasant. Oftentimes it's related to muscle tension or lack thereof, heart rate, temperature. And now I would love to invite you to write in the chat any pleasant sensations or sensations of well-being that you experienced. I'm going to read these out loud. Tingling all over my whole body. I'm assuming that's pleasant, Jenna. Less back tension, deeper breath possible. Nice, Shannon. Yeah. Just knowing that oftentimes we notice the absence of something, right? Absence of my neck, absence of tension in my neck and my jaw tell me that I'm that those are pleasant sensations or sensations of well-being. Warmth flowing inside. Nice. Assuming that's also pleasant. Yeah. I notice even just stopping and slowing down in that way, right? I notice that my breath gets more expansive. I notice my cadence of my speaking slows down just a little bit, right? All of these things that can kind of happen when we just bring our mind to something that is more pleasant. And so what we're doing here is we're not just noticing thinking positively, right? We're not just changing the way that we're thinking about something. We're taking it a step beyond that and we're sensing it in our body. When we start to notice well-being, when we start to notice that we're experiencing something pleasant, when we start to notice we're in that zone a little bit more, right? It signals to our body that we're safe and we're speaking in what's called sensation language to a part of our brain that only responds to that. So we're going to talk about that in a moment. Yes, heart rate is a lot slower. I noticed that as well. My heart rate decreased, right? So what we're doing right now is we're noticing those places of well-being, or when we're just in our zone, when we have deeper capacity. So I want you to take a moment and just think about potentially when you think using a resource could work for you. I'm going to just say a couple more things about resourcing is that sometimes I have certain resources that work sometimes, and sometimes they don't work, right? So I have resources that I use, like there's this place on the river that I love so much. And oftentimes that resource will work for me if I'm getting bumped a little high or am bumped a little bit high because it's such a relaxing, soothing resource. If I'm feeling low, however, I don't really want to put myself in this really relaxing place because what that can do is kind of bump me a little bit lower because I'm experiencing like kind of that downturn where I want that parasympathetic to come in a little bit more. And I may call to mind a resource that has more energy to it, right? So I really love biking. So I may call to mind a time biking that was really pleasant for me, and it may bring a little bit more energy to my body. So you can also think about different resources for different times. And oftentimes, the more that we practice, the more intensified these resources become in our nervous system. Our nervous system starts to respond faster to it, and the quicker we're able to call on the resources because they're more embedded into our body systems. Okay. So the third skill is called grounding. And grounding is probably a skill that a lot of you have heard of before. I saw that there are some people that have breathing or meditation practices. I work with a meditation group in town that teaches in our schools, and we often talk about this model as even a precursor to meditation, right? It's that pre-learning to then even become a more experienced meditator. In fact, the Dalai Lama worked with a university in California, I believe in Berkeley, and just put out a social, emotional, and ethical curriculum. And this model is chapter 2, which again is the foundation for moving into the model. So this tracking piece, all of this, our foundation, it's the foundation from which this social, emotional, ethical learning curriculum for students is a part of. So grounding, again, the way that we in the Trauma Resource Institute define grounding is the direct contact of the body or part of the body with something that provides support in the present moment, and noticing sensations that are safe, pleasant, and or neutral. So we can ground in a variety of different ways. There's no right way to ground. You can ground with your legs crossed. You can ground with your hands on your face. You can ground any way you want to in this model. And we also don't ever bring attention to breathing. And that's strategic because a lot of times breathing is not a safe place for people, or people don't enjoy bringing their attention to their breathing. And so this model we say is accessible, and that's because everybody gets to choose to do the skills in whichever way works best for their nervous system. So I often have kids that ground with their head on the table, right? Or like this. And that's fine. I don't need to have them sit up with both feet on the ground, right? In this upright position. In some ways of teaching it, that's how we do it, right? So there are different models, but in this model, it's just taught to be whatever feels best for you and your nervous system and your body. So I'm going to invite you right now to go through a breathing or a grounding exercise with me. So I will invite you to, again, since we can't see anyone, you can do whatever you want. You can lay on the ground, you can stand up against a wall, you can sit in your chair, you can do whatever you want. You can stand. And I'm going to invite you to close your eyes or not. If you don't close your eyes, it can often be nice to look just a few feet lightly in front of you. And then I'm just going to invite you to notice where your body is making contact with a surface or something that is providing support to the body. If you're sitting, bring attention to your seat, making contact with your chair, couch. If you're standing, bring awareness to those feet on the floor. Maybe you're back against a wall or against the ground. Noticing where your hands make contact with your body. And notice the sensations that are more pleasant or neutral within your body. And take your time. This is where you can notice, again, those things like muscle tension, your heart rate, your breathing, your temperature. If you become aware of any unpleasant sensations, just pivot to an area that feels more pleasant or neutral, where you can always return to your resource. As you bring your attention to any neutral or comfortable sensations, just notice any change. And as we get ready to end here, slowly scan your body and bring your attention to all the sensations that are more pleasant or neutral. And then again, just take a moment to notice any changes from the beginning of grounding until now. And then I'll just invite you to come back. And I'd love it if you could put in the chat again any pleasant or neutral sensations that you experienced, or if you noticed any shifts or changes. I noticed that my stomach started growling, right? Which is that parasympathetic nervous system, that little gurgle in my belly. It's also tracking, right? I'm noticing I'm getting a little hungry. Intense calm. Yes, my tummy is hungry. Yeah, it's funny how we can cue into those things when we slow down, right? My breathing rate slowed down a lot. Heart rate slowed down. Right. So again, just taking these moments of, again, that was probably a minute and a half, maybe, of just intentional slowing down time. And the difference again is that we all know this skill, right? We all know this skill of stopping. We've all heard this a lot. Your energy level lowered to a stillness, right? The difference is we're taking it one step further and we're noticing the sensations that are accompanying this calming, right? Where does that happen? How do I know that I'm in my zone? How do I know these sensations that are tied with well-being? How do I know where these sensations are tied with calm, right? And again, we're going to talk about it right now. It's our brain that we're speaking to. We're speaking to these parts of the brain that do not respond to word communication. They respond to sensing communication. That was nice for me. Thank you. As I move into this last few minutes of this training, we're going to go through the brain and one more skill. So the organizing principles of the brain. I want you to know that I know I am oversimplifying the brain right now, and I feel bad every time I do this. But for this model, it's one way to really help us understand why we use this crazy sensation language, or why we're so fascinated with sensations. So there's these three parts of the brain. For those of you that know Dan Siegel's hand model, I'm going to use that. I invite you at home to do it, because we know that when we do something a little more experiential, we bring bodies to it, just like we're practicing today. These skills will stick with us because we're practicing them. I'm going to have you hold your hand up. And I'm going to go through this quicker than he would, so please Google Dan Siegel hand model later. It's really great. Thanks, Shannon. Hi. So this part of our brain right here. So I'm going to show you the brain going this way. This is the front part of our brain, and I'm opening it up this way. Okay, so this part right here is our survival brain. It's instinctual. It's all the things that we did when we stood up and run, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. We don't talk to it. We don't tell our heart rate to increase. It does it on its own. I say that it does a lot of the F functions. It does the fight, flight, and freeze. We have no control over it, right? It does the fooding. So all the survival stuff, it helps us seek foods for survival. And then the other F word, which I think is hilarious, is procreating, right? It's in charge of keeping us functioning as a species, right? So all these things, reproduction, digestion, etc. When we move up, we move to this middle part of our brain, which is the limbic part. It is the part that houses expression and emotions, okay? And we're going to talk about this next part, but I'm going to fold my thumb in, and this is part of the limbic system, but it's called the amygdala, and it's one part we're going to talk about on the next slide a little bit more, is what I call the smoke detector. When we fold over our fingers, that is our cortex. Our cortex is the only part of the brain that has language. It is where we have thoughts. It's where we input and integrate all the parts of this brain. It's executive functioning, etc., right? So when we say we flip our lids, right, or we bump out of our zones, it means these two parts of our brain have taken over. And these two parts of our brain do not communicate with language. That's why when someone says calm down, it doesn't actually make you calm down. Or when someone asks you what's wrong or why did you do something when your lid is flipped, it's virtually impossible to be in a good place to do it, right? We cannot function when our lid is flipped. We see this a lot with toddlers, right? When they are flipped, or children, there is no way we can even try to have a coherent conversation. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the amygdala here. The amygdala, this part right here, I often think of it as a smoke alarm. It's like the smoke alarm in my house right now. The smoke alarm is on all the time. It's constantly surveying the scene for danger, right? It surveys, just like my smoke alarm does. The second that smoke hits it, right, the alarm goes off, signals to my survival brain to go into fight, flight, or freeze. I need to do something instinctual here. I need to take care of something, right? Same with my smoke alarm. The second that smoke hits it, the fire alarm goes off, right? It's kind of like, I think of it as a printing press too, right? It has highly charged situations come at me, stamps things as either safe or unsafe. It's stamping all day. People I meet, stamping unsafe or safe. And it keeps tabs on it. It's kind of like a filing cabinet. Now, like I said earlier, our brain really has strong ties to strongly associated negative events, because those things keep us alive, right? So I need to know, I need to not have any thought at all if I step out into the road and a car darts out at me, right? Or I dart out into the road and a car's coming, right? I need to be able to move out of the way as quickly as possible. I don't want to think about, am I going to fight, flight, or freeze right now, right? No, I just want my body to make the instant response so that I can be safe. But it doesn't do that with, say, tonight as I'm looking out my window and there's a beautiful sun setting over these hills. My amygdala doesn't hold that strongly of that event. That is why we have to work so much harder on creating these new neural pathways of well-being, because our brain really wants to pull us to these other places for reasons that are supposed to be instinctual and keep us alive and safe. But oftentimes it's doing it for things that are just not, they're not life-threatening to us, right? When we get into an argument with a spouse or a child or a friend, they're actually, if we are in safe, healthy relationships, they are not life-threatening to us, right? But our body still has that physiological response of fight or flight or freezing, right? That respond to it. And so this is, again, why we have this opportunity to, can we sense safety? So there's only two ways that our instinctual brains, these two, our fight, flight, freeze brain, right? And our limbic brain, our emotional brain, respond. One of them is sensing. So you just noticed, maybe you were already in your zone, but as you sensed in the last two exercises, you sensed more safety in your situation. That's why your breathing dropped even more, right? That's why your heart rate went down even more. Your brain is like, oh, we all good here. I just get to relax. This is feeling good, right? Another way that it can sense safety, or that we can quiet these down without words, is through orientation. And all that means is looking around at where I am. Animals do it all the time. If you see a deer with its head down, a crack of a stick, the deer is immediately going to pick its head up and look around, right? It's orienting itself to see if it's safe or not, right? And we can do this all the time too. So when I was training staff members and bringing students back, and I was doing this with them as well, I was saying that first day that you have a child in your classroom, have them look around, right? Just have them, they're going to be stressed out, so have them orient to their place. Can you name 5 things that you see? Can you notice all the red things? what are some things that are new in the class that have never been a part of our classroom before, right? So they're not saying we're going to orient to tell our brains that we're safe. No, but they're doing it. They're allowing the opportunity to look around at their situation so that the brain starts to orient like, oh, I am okay here. Like I can see my surroundings and everything looks okay. So one way that we can do that with ourselves as well. So this is a big piece just as part of the brain. So the reason I'm gonna put this here right where we are is when we think about our brains, one of the most incredible parts of our human experience are our mirror neurons and our ability to empathize with another person. We're the only creature that has the capacity to think about what someone else is thinking and what that might be like for them or what they're experiencing, right? And so it's an incredible gift that we have, and it's also incredibly challenging because our mirror neurons and our physiology often want to mirror one another. So best example I can think of is when you've had an okay day at work, or you've experiencing something really joyful and you come home and potentially the person or people that you're living with, you open that front door and you walk in and you feel like you get smacked by a black cloud of doom, right? And you're like, whoa, what's going on inside there, right? And it's almost like instantly you notice a shift in yourself. And in one way, this can be incredibly helpful, right? If someone is going through something painful or challenging, we want to be there with that person. We want to be able to empathize, to share with that person and what they're going through. On the other hand, we also don't want to always be taking on someone else's trauma or stress, etc. And so once we start to notice that our mirror neurons are firing, we're feeling something, because now we have the ability to track, we can still empathize with that person, but we can stay in our zones. We can keep our body regulated. We can notice that this is not happening to us right now, right? And so that we can keep ourselves healthy and not take on someone else's stress. This also helps because it can go the opposite, right? How many times have we had a challenging situation and someone has helped bring us up? This is also called, can be vicarious learning. So that slide that I showed earlier about ourselves being able to stay regulated and show that we have resiliency skills is a huge indicator of a child being able to do the same thing. So just us being able to model these things has a huge impact on the people that we're around, not just children, but one another. I have to skip a few of these because we're running a little bit low on time. So again, learning these wellness skills, one of the most beautiful things about this model is that we don't have to talk about our stress or our trauma. I don't have to ask someone about their story if they don't want to talk about it, because I can just ask them to notice maybe somewhere that's more pleasant than where they are currently right now. Or we can do a skill and work with the distress that's happening. And that can be the same for you too. And that our symptoms or our common reactions are not mental weakness. They are biological, natural responses to stress and trauma. And this can bring a great sense of relief. I know it brought a great sense of relief for me and continues to do so in the moment when I'm bumping out of my zone or having these strong physiological responses to some sort of stress I'm going through. So I'm going to end with this last set of skills, because these are ones that often can work best when our lid is flipped and we're operating really highly in these places that don't respond to language at all. Sometimes I can't resource because it takes too much thought to be like place or thing and how can I sense it, but I can do some other actions to get my brain a little bit more online to know that I'm in a present moment, right? That I am actually okay if I am in a safe situation, right? And so again, we did tracking, resourcing, and grounding, and this has helped now. So it can help when we're stuck in our high or low zones, and it can help us get us back into our zone. So some of the materials that I sent to Shannon today to send out has a poster about Help Now strategies and some information about it. But again, these are probably things that you've done before, but you don't call them these things. They just have a very neuroscience or brain-based way of working. And they're signaling, again, a lot of these are orientation sort of skills. So we get to orient. So name 6 colors you see in the room. If your eyes tend to shut when you get stressed out, open them, right? We tend to ruminate a lot when our eyes are closed. Counting backwards, if you can do this while you're walking. So doing a lot of things that are just bringing us back to the here and now quickly to just get this front part just a little bit more online so that we can start integrating here and calming these 2 things down. Drinking a glass of water, right? When I train some people in domestic violence shelters, and they always say the first thing that we do is offer people a glass of water. Well, they aren't doing it because they knew it was some help now strategy, but we do that because it signals to that parasympathetic nervous system to start that saliva and digestion process, which puts on that brake on that nervous system. So again, look here and see, maybe there's some that'll work for you. Maybe tonight as you go about your evening, when you're cooking dinner, you could practice with some of these pushing against a wall or pushing your back into against a wall or slowly moving and counting and seeing how that works, but trying some of these out. These are some of the #1 go-tos that I use when when I'm working with a student or an adult that really just needs some immediate relief to just be able to get to a place where we're a little bit more regulated. And same goes for me too, when I just need a little bit of like a reset to get myself to where I can think more rationally. And there's the slide that I sent out to you. So again, this model is just about learning the ability to to shift from distress to well-being. And again, it doesn't mean that we're ignoring anything that's happening in our experience. It's what else is true, what else is happening in the present moment, right? If I'm going through a really stressful situation, all of you were able to hopefully recall things that bring you strength or uplift you or bring you a sense of joy or peace or calm. That doesn't mean that everything's just magical butterflies. It means that there is something else that's going on. And also just noticing the sensations that are tied with it. The last thing I'll say is that our brains and neuroplasticity that we're learning so much more about is that in order to lay these new neural pathways, right, whatever fires together, wires together, we need to focus on something for about 14 seconds. So the next time you see a beautiful sunset, the next time you're resourcing, the next time you're grounding, see if you can stay with those sensations that are really present. Don't worry, your brain is going to take you back to distress. It just does that because it wants to keep you safe. But we want to begin building that resiliency in ourselves and other people. I would love to share more with you. I have a lot more on how we can work on these skills with one another. And Shannon, I'm going to have you come on and end us.
Awesome. I'm going to, let's see, try this again. In the chat box, I have put links. I've put links to the feedback form as well as to sharing our hope. So I first just want to say, Laurie, thank you so much for your time this evening. Thank you for sharing this incredible information with us. I'm hoping that as things come back to real life and we have normal human interactions in close proximity, that perhaps we'll be able to offer a CREM training in the Truckee area. But hope is the state of mind that believes and desires a positive outcome in situations in your life. It's the feeling that things will turn out for the best. It's consistently looking forward to that positive outcome, to something planned in our life. The Tahoe Truckee School District is going to be launching a new program called Hope Squads. It's a suicide prevention peer-to-peer program. And so I really want us as a community to start sharing hope. Also, it's Suicide Prevention Month, and one of the best ways that we can prevent suicide is by sharing hope with others. And so there is a Google form where I'm collecting feedback from folks. It will also enter you to win a gift certificate from a local restaurant. And we love feedback. So please take a moment to share some feedback for Mental Health in the Mountains. Today's presentation is the 21st with Laurie Strand, and that's helpful information for us to be able to do future planning. So Laurie, thank you so much.
Thank you. Great to see you, Shannon.
It's so good to see you. Yes.
Take care.
Awesome. All right, everybody.
Thanks,
Have a good
everybody.
evening.